Now, I would like to request Dr. Sriparna Pathak, Associate Professor at OP Jindal Global University and the founding director of the Center of Northeast Asian Studies, to share her understanding on the Chinese Communist Party, its war doctrines, and espionage networks. The module will be of 1 hour, and I request the speaker to adhere to the timings for the smooth functioning of the program.
Good afternoon, everyone. It was a wonderful lunch. So while the slides are being fixed, I'll just briefly tell you what I'm here to discuss. What I plan to discuss today is laying out an understanding of the Chinese Communist Party, its war doctrines, and its espionage, given the fact that most of the crowd here is comprised of students. I'll try and make it as easy as possible. But if not, then at the end of the, when I end speaking, raise your hand. Okay, so why do we need a war doctrine? Why do we need to understand the CCP's war doctrines? There's a simple reason, and the simplest reason is that a well-articulated security doctrine is advantageous not just to the political leadership of the country, but also to the military leadership of a country. Now, China, since its inception as a modern state, after its creation, or as they call it, liberation in October 1949, decided on a very clear-cut war doctrine or a strategy. But before I go into the history of that, in the post-Cold War scenario, what has happened is that the role which is played by the military in sustaining broad parameters of a country's foreign policy has changed a lot. If you see even today in 2023, no civilized country thinks in terms of settling differences amongst other countries through a war alone. Militant tribes in the ancient era would rather think of a military strategy and settling all disputes through a military or a more war doctrine per se. But in today's world, this understanding has changed rapidly. So what we now know as this peace dividend, neither is it universally applicable, neither is it universally understood, nor is it freely available to all states in equal proportions. So every state has its own military doctrines and the way it understands how it can further its own national interests. In short, the military posture definitely remains a vital attribute in the conduct of overall statecraft, but diplomacy also matters. So we study the military, which forms the bedrock of the national security of any country, and that's what I'll try and do for the CCP as well, or for the PRC, People's Republic of China. Now, before we get into understanding these war doctrines or how they have evolved in the format in which it stands today, it's very important we understand the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party. So the CCP, as I think all of us know, is the founding and the sole ruling party of the PRC. Mao Zedong had actually led the civil war, and the CCP emerged victorious against the KMT, or the Nationalist Party. So in 1949, Mao proclaimed this establishment of the PRC, and since then the CCP has been governing China. It has the sole control over the People's Liberation Army, and each successive leader of the CCP has gone on to add his own theories. I don't mention her over here because there's been no precedent in China who is a woman. Each of these CCP leaders has added his own theories to the party's constitution, and the party's constitution outlines the ideology of the party, collectively referred to as socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, as of 2023, the CCP has more than 98 million members, making it the second largest political party. Very often we think it was Mao Zedong who had created the CCP, but it was not Mao Zedong. It were two people called Chan Tu-Xiu and Li Ta-Chao, who led the founding of the CCP with the help of the Far Eastern Bureau. And this is in 1921, even before the Second Cold War had actually, unfurled in the way that it did. For the first 6 years of its existence, CCP aligned itself with the KMT, an organized left wing of the larger nationalist movement. But soon enough, the KMT, or the Nationalist Party, led by Chiang Kai-shek, turned on the CCP and massacred tens of thousands of the party's members. The two parties, of course, split, and that started a prolonged civil war. So in the next 10 years, it was very essential that Mao Zedong and CCP remain alive. and they adopted a lot of strategies. What really worked for the CCP was guerrilla warfare, or in simple terms, hit and run. So Mao Zedong became the most influential figure in CCP because he was excellent in the strategies around guerrilla warfare. So the party established a strong base amongst the rural peasantry. It's easy to hit and run when you're in the rural peasantry. And then it talked about land reform policies, and as human beings, all of us want egalitarianism. So that really appealed to the local base. So support for the CCP grew throughout the second Sino-Japanese War, beginning in the 1930s, and after the imperialist Japanese empire surrendered in 1945, the CCP emerged triumphant in this communist revolution. KMT had no choice. It retreated to Taiwan and established the Republic of China, or Taiwan as we know it. Now, the Chinese Communist Party, when it started out, it said it is organized based on something called democratic centralism. I know the terms sound a little oxymoronic because democratic centralism. Apparently, this principle, as per CCP documents, it entails an open policy discussion on the condition of unity among party members in upholding agreed upon decisions. The highest body of the Chinese Communist Party is the National Congress, which is convened every fifth year. So when the National Congress is not in session, it takes place only once in 5 years, the Central Committee is the highest body. But then again, the Central Committee meets only once a year. Most duties and responsibilities are vested in the Politburo and its Standing Committee. Members of the latter, or the Standing Committee, are seen as the CCP's top leadership. And when I say CCP's top leadership, I mean both the party and the state. Today, the party's leader holds the offices of the General Secretary. So Xi Jinping is also the General Secretary, who's responsible for civilian party duties. He's the chairman of the Central Military Commission, responsible for military affairs, and state president of the PRC, or People's Republic of China. Now, because of these posts, the party leader is seen as the country's paramount leader. So the current leader, Xi Jinping, who was elected in the first plenary session of the 18th Central Committee. Remember, the Central Committee is held once in 5 years. It was held in, this particular 18th Central Committee was held on 15 November 2012. He's been reselected twice since then. And I emphasize reselected. He continues to be hold three very important positions: General Secretary of the party, Chairman of the Central Military Commission, and the State President. I'll quickly skip the CCP's origins and membership, and I'll just, briefly tell you about it. Immediately after the CCP was formed and, the PRC came into being, it followed policies of Marxism-Leninism, which then got molded into Maoism. What has happened since then is that it's went through a lot of chaos domestically, and multiple times the CCP has had to rely on the PLA to ensure that there is domestic order and stability. A few examples are, this large-scale unrest, due to the very hedonistic policies of Mao Zedong during the Great Leap Forward, or the absolute massacre of people during the Cultural Revolution. The PLA had to be called in. Cut to the 1990s, the CCP has decided it has to show a very technocratic capacity, because there are now newer developmental stresses, because now China was beginning to grow economically. So the party started trying and understand what are the rewards of globalization and economic development, and then soon realized that the massive population which China had can be utilized, leveraged to push for economic power, which can then be leveraged for military power, which can then be leveraged for a combination of economic and military power can be used to leverage political clout in international affairs. Okay, I briefly mentioned the number of party members in the CCP. Just to give you an idea about the composition, over 70% of them are men, though the number of women in the party has grown in recent years. Over the years, the party members themselves have understood what would people want, and that's how they've tweaked the membership. Number of people or number of members in the CCP with college degrees has also increased. Number of younger members, younger than 40, that's also increased. Agricultural and blue-collar workers, Their numbers have also increased, and currently they make up 30% of the CCP membership. Remember, it's the Chinese Communist Party, so agricultural workers' numbers always have to be decent enough so that the people do not express discontentment. Okay, coming to the power structure. As I said, CCP convenes its National Party Congress once in every 5 years. What does it do? It sets out major policies and it selects top leaders. Now, this is not to be confused with the National People's Congress, which is China's legislature. Now, during this time, members choose the Central Committee, which comprises 370 members and alternates, including ministers, senior regulatory officials, provincial leaders, and military officers. Central Committee acts as a sort of board of directors for the CCP. It's required to hold annual meetings, which are known as plenums. The Central Committee also selects the Politburo, which has 25 members. Now, once the Politburo is selected, that in turn chooses the Politburo Standing Committee through very secretive backroom negotiations. The Standing Committee functions as the epicenter of the CCP's power and leadership, and the membership has largely ranged throughout history from 5 to 9 people. Coming to China's military, or the PLA, it's technically the armed wing of the CCP, and its main objectives include protecting the party's rule and defending the party's interest. So, which is why the CCP's Central Military Commission is headed by the president, or currently Xi Jinping. Now, the head of the CCP Military Commission also oversees both the People's Liberation Army and the People's Armed Force. One is the army, one is the armed force. People's Armed Force focuses on internal security. So there was this 2020 US Defense Department report on China's military, which states that the CCP sees the PLA as a practical instrument of its statecraft with an active role in advancing the PRC's foreign policy, particularly with regards to PRC's global interests, and aims to revise aspects of the international order. Just to give you an example, the PLA also oversees the deployment of warships and aircraft near disputed areas of the East and South China Seas, as well as near Taiwan. Coming to Xi Jinping. Now, Xi Jinping, just a second, something is really going wrong. Power structure. Okay, just to give you an idea, who is Xi Jinping and what are his policies? He's the Xi Jinping, just to take a brief detour, G20 happened and India has been lauded as being, a very successful, leader of the G20. But before it happened, there were lots of news. Xi Jinping is not coming to India for the G20. Why did we focus so much on Xi Jinping? There were a lot of other, at least 3 more leaders who didn't come to India for the G20, and the reasons are different. Vladimir Putin was talked about because, Russia-Ukraine crisis is happening. But still, if you just do a comparison, Xi was more talked about. Mexico's Prime Minister also didn't come to India for the G20. Why didn't he come? Well, he didn't. He hasn't gone for the last 4 years, and he says that the G20 is an imperialistic tool, a capitalist tool, and so on. So he didn't come this year as well as to India, but we didn't talk about him. I think it was Spain's leader also who didn't come to India because he tested positive for COVID. But how much do we know about it? How much are we talking? And Spain is from Europe, But we talk about Xi. Why do we talk about Xi? Who is he? Well, Xi is definitely the leader of the PRC, definitely the head of the CCP. But just to give you a background, he's the son of a CCP revolutionary. And Xi Jinping actually he was there when the Cultural Revolution was happening, and he had the front stage, I would say dishonor. He had the dishonor of sitting in the front stage while his father was incarcerated. He was seen as, his father was seen as not being in line with the CCP's policies or being a challenge to Mao Zedong. So his father was ridiculed. He was of course, incarcerated. Xi Jinping's half-sister reportedly committed suicide because of all the incarcerations. Xi Jinping was sent down to the countryside, wherein he was to work as a rural youth, and all sorts of atrocities happened against him. So he saw what happens when power gets accumulated in one person. Yet we have the Xi, wherein power is again accumulated in one person. So clearly, she has done a lot to, restore the party's central role in the society and to push China to reclaim, China's power on the world stage. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking so often about Xi Jinping. Maybe we should start talking about the other leaders as well. But then coming back to this presentation, so he has the Xi Jinping thought, which has been enshrined in the party's constitution. What is Xi Jinping doctrine? So Xi Jinping doctrine roughly talks about modernization, anti corruption, revival of China's honor, great power status, and so on. What he has done is that he has pushed for a great modernization of the military. Why military? That clearly has implications for China's foreign policy. He's also increased state control over private companies, amongst a lot of other actions, showing the power of the CCP. She consolidated his control of the party. He ousted rivals left, right, and center. He promoted supporters. He launched this massive anti-corruption campaign in 2012. He targeted more than 4 million officials, including high-level officials. He called it the policy of tigers and flies. Catch the high-level officials, who are the tigers; flies, low-level party cadres, who are the flies. But both types engaging in corruption. So when Xi Jinping actually got elevated to that position wherein he was considered for becoming, the president, that sort of elevation marks the first time ever that the CCP has moved towards strongman rule since Deng Xiaoping. Once Mao Zedong died in 1976, and after Hua Guofeng, Deng Xiaoping took the reins of power, Deng Xiaoping tried to ensure that that concentration of power in one person never happens again, because China saw a lot of horrors. Actually, Deng Xiaoping was also incarcerated by Mao Zedong, but at least he didn't die. So when he came to power, you see, we don't refer to the president of China any longer as Chairman Mao or Chairman Xi or Chairman Tang or Chairman who. It's president, right? So there were these very small things that were done. But when Xi Jinping came to power, rather, it's moved back to strongman rule since Deng Xiaoping. And, a lot of experts on modern China, they have cautioned, Chinese themselves know, that relying on a single leader to navigate reforms it can be a big threat to the party's survival. There's Tsai Xia, and this would be my suggestion to the students here. You can look her up on, all sorts of social media nowadays. And she was a former CCP member who's now escaped, and now she's in the US. She said that Xi's consolidation of power crushed any form of policy debate among the party's top officials. Similarly, Elizabeth C. Economy, who writes a lot on China's society, she's also argued that China's economy is suffering because of Xi's control. Too much party control, perhaps too much consolidated in Xi's hands, has contributed to economic stagnation. Okay. Just to give you an idea about the party and the military, who does the army report to? What has changed under Xi Jinping? So the party and the PLA got intertwined in the early years of the CCP rule, because China's needs were such that, the needs of the party to survive could be ensured only by the PLA, which is why they got intertwined, and they've remained that way. This thing has not changed till date. Then, when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened in 1991, the CCP got convinced that it has to keep a hold on the military so that its rule does not get challenged. So, this is a party, CCP, which fought a guerrilla warfare and won. It's been running one of the longest, single-party regimes in modern history. Why has this done so? Why has this happened? This has happened because CCP has paid great attention to control over the military. And I'll just go back to 1927, wherein Mao Zedong said that, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. That was something which he told the CCP, and the CCP remembers. Remember, CCP is not a democracy, so none of these policies apply to democracies. But it's obviously important to know about one of the most important members of India and a revisionist state, which is China. Now, I'll skip a bit of the history and talk more about, the modern world, so that we can have a easier discussion with the youngsters. So, question again, who does the military report to? So, the military reports to the Central Military Commission, as I briefly mentioned, and any talk of nationalizing the military, suggesting that the military would serve any elected political party, will be seen as being subversive to China. There has to be utmost loyalty from the PLA to the CCP. In theory, PLA is also accountable to the National People's Congress, which is the highest organ of state power, and the national legislature, through a parallel reporting line to another CMC, Central Military Commission, within the state structure. But the two CMCs consist of exactly the same members, and the chairman of both is usually the leader of the party, currently Xi Jinping. In addition to national defense and helping out with disaster and emergency relief efforts, the PLA has played an unusually important role in the country's economic and social development. PLA soldiers helped build the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone. They've worked at the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, which is a paramilitary economic organization tasked with building and operating farms and settlements in Xinjiang, or the East Turkestan region. Unlike the defense ministers of other countries, the Ministry of National Defense in China plays the role of engaging foreign countries. This is a juxtaposition. You will not hear of the MOD engaging with other countries. For that, we have the MEA. But this is one very unique aspect about the PRC. So, Defense Minister General Li Shangfu, who by the way is missing right now, is a member of the Communist Party's CMC, Central Military Commission. What have been the military party relations under Xi Jinping? So after Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, as I said, he launched this, flies and tigers and flies campaign, anti-corruption campaign, and it was aimed first and foremost at the military. He smashed the strongholds of many interest groups within the army. For decades, the military was known to be rife with corruption, starting in the 1980s, when military personnel were allowed to run businesses to support their expenditures. Now, these practices got banned in 1998, but this practice rose early on, right? So it kept happening. Corruption was rampant in the army. So in 2015, Xi moves to end the PLA's profit-making activities. He orders it to focus on transforming it into a modern army, which can win wars. Now, all of his directives to the PLA mean something for foreign policy, especially for a country which is locked in a conflict even right now. Then in 2017, China amended the party charter to state that all military forces in China were accountable to the CMC chairman, putting it in absolute black and white that the PLA and paramilitary forces have to be absolutely loyal to the CMC chairman or Xi Jinping. Now, Xi Jinping said that the reforms were part of his efforts to turn the world's largest armed forces into a modern military on par with Western counterparts. So, reforms were also brought in to introduce newer aspects into China's 1.5 million strong paramilitary police force, or the People's Armed Police, which also is under the control of the CMC. So clearly through these, Xi Jinping also gained overall control over the PAP, or the People's Armed Police Force, which is important for domestic stability. Earlier, the PAP used to come under a dual command structure of the CMC and the State Council via the Ministry of Public Security. But now it's under Xi Jinping. All roads lead to Xi Jinping. China revised its national defense law to weaken the role of the State Council in formulating military policy, handling full decision-making powers to the CMC. Now, all of this, in short, has extended Xi Jinping's powers over the military in humongous ways. So, the military strategy of China, we often talk about Sun Tzu, Sun Bin, and others. But Chinese writings do not restrict this whole thing to, just Sun Tzu or Sun Bin. There are a lot of other things which are also happening. So there is Xi Jinping thought, and there is definitely a military aspect to it as well, which is why we need to read Xi Jinping thought. Now, to understand, the military thought in China, it's a very broad spectrum, spanning through decades and centuries, starting from Confucius to others. China talks about being a 5,000-year-old civilization, which is debatable, and they themselves call it a peace-loving nation. But there are these wars which were fought against India in 1962, against Vietnam in 1979, and so on. So, how do these two very opposite things come together? Of course, the leadership has to state something to its own populace, right? How do they do it? So, to understand that, I would suggest currently we are living, under the Xi phenomenon in China. So, read his speeches more often, read between the lines. Okay, coming to the military doctrines, roughly between 1956 to 2014, China adopted 7 military doctrines. The doctrines which were adopted before 1993, largely they talked about a people's war, and these followed Mao Zedong's thought about guerrilla war and domestic stability, etc. People's war was the orthodox doctrine of the Chinese military, which comes from the Mao era. Now, people's war had a very protracted total war understanding, which is based on sacrificing human force, gaining as much time as possible, and it conceived of 3 phases of war: strategic defense, strategic stalemate, and strategic counteroffensive. Moreover, a people's war would be fought with a triadic force composed of the main forces or the regular forces, the local forces, and guerrilla forces. Now, I'd like to rather elaborate more on the doctrine since 1993, 2004, and 2013 because these are important to understand the current Chinese military strategy. So, in 1993, China adopted this military doctrine called winning local wars under high technology conditions. Compared to previous military doctrines, this new doctrine was a radical departure given its offensive nature. As I briefly mentioned, what was there before 1993 thought of a triadic force: regular forces or the main forces, local forces, guerrilla forces. Now, this saw complete departure. The previous doctrines before 1993 were based on countering a mainland invasion. But this new doctrine in 1993 envisaged a war which China would fight in its periphery under modern conditions, which is why it uses the term technology. So the doctrine was offensive. It held the first strike to take advantage of adversary forces. It was not reactive like the previous doctrines, but it was an active war fighting doctrine. And this doctrine underlines the role of elite troops instead of the humancy which Mao Zedong generally talked of. Previously, the PLA valued the role of the land forces. Um, Previous military doctrines were rather tied to the land area or ground warfare. The concept of joint operations, on the other hand, which largely comes in, it highlights the role of the Air Force, the Navy, and so on. This new doctrine redefined the relationship between the 3 services. The focus was on limited wars. It was, and now the periphery also starts getting talked about in this new doctrine. And this was a central change for the Chinese military. Okay, let's go to the 2004 doctrine. The 2004 doctrine is about winning local wars under informationized conditions. So, this was adopted in 2004. This was not a very big or a radical departure from the 1993 doctrine. It does talk about the concept of informators of using information, replacing previous phrases like high technological conditions. Now, using information basically refers to the coordination of the armed services conducting joint operations. To conduct such operations, this 2004 doctrine instructs the Chinese military to invest in developing command, control, communications, computers, and intelligence surveillance reconnaissance. C4ISR as the PLA now calls it. So, this didn't abolish the existing organizational structures. Just to put it differently, this new doctrine aimed at guiding the military's adaptation to the concept of the system warfare. I'll come to systems warfare in a bit. Let's go to the latest one, 2014 doctrine. Winning, again I will be stuttering over this, winning information warfare. China's most recent military doctrine called winning information warfare or winning informationized local wars was adopted in 2014. This new doctrine is something which is of an active defense doctrine. Now, in 2015, China released something again, and it talks about adherence to the principles of defense, self-defense, and post-emptive strike. Post-emptive strike, very important. And adherence to the stance that we will not attack unless we are attacked. I think a lot of us, I don't see any foreign audience anymore, but what has been the narrative since 2020 Galwan? The narrative which has been there even in 1962, 1967, 1987, Doklam Galwan, was that India attacked first. China did not attack first. It's a separate thing that we also have surveillance or satellite imagery now, which China completely discounts. But why is this narrative? Why does this narrative? And it's been pushed out a lot after 2020, because the 2015 doctrine says that China is going to adhere to the principles of self-defense, and post-emptive strike. So China says what it has done in Galwan is a post-emptive strike. So um, while it says that this whole posture is going to be defensive in nature, they also talk about offensive missions at tactical and operational levels. So this doctrine is not a huge departure from its predecessors, the 2004 and 1993 doctrine, but it talks about the role of flexibility, mobility, integrated joint operations, information dominance, and precision strikes. So it's designed to provide new improvements and adjustments to China's 1993 doctrine largely. Now, this doctrine also sets tasks for the PLA to prepare for conducting what is called MOOTW, or military operations other than war. Military operations other than war. Information war. I'm going to come to that in a bit. So this, MOOTW, military operations other than war, proves China's long-term efforts to build capacity for conducting operations which are abroad and overseas. This 2014 doctrine holds an assertive and self-dependent stance for China's near maritime and territorial interests. When it comes to China's overseas interests, the doctrine has a less ambitious stance, as strategic guidelines underline international security cooperation. But it's very clear in this doctrine that besides increasing the number of weapon systems, China also is developing the quality of its naval weapon systems and information systems for both domestic and foreign policy purposes. As enshrined in this doctrine, China's top priority remains preparing for local wars. The term local wars has implications for, Asia, of course. And it says that there will be wars fought in its periphery. Again, periphery has implications for India. In the upcoming decades, as China's power projection capacity increases, we can expect that the PLA is going to develop military doctrines for fighting wars in regions other than just, Taiwan or Southeast Asia. Okay, since I mentioned information warfare, I'll briefly talk about the three warfare strategy, or three tactics, as it's also called in English. It's an official political and information non-kinetic warfare strategy, which employs media or public opinion, psychological warfare, and legal warfare. This, these work regulations around the three warfares, these were set forth in the amended political work regulations of the PLA in 2003. We talk about information warfare largely from 2021 and 2022, at least in the US and other democratic countries. But this clearly, the three warfares were set in the work regulations of the PLA in 2003 in China. Information warfare. In the PLA's Science of Military Strategy, it's noted that information systems are playing a big role. They've played a big role in the Gulf War. Precision guided weapons made up only 7% of all weapons used by the US military, but they destroyed 80% of important targets. So, 2007 book, Information Warfare Theory, written by the president of the PLA Information Engineering University, states that information warfare is at the center of China's military reforms. So, this concept of three warfares is believed to be inspired from the Zhou dynasty strategist Sun Tzu, his book The Art of War. I know history is boring. As a student, there were instances when I did find history boring. But the fact is, to understand strategy or foreign policy, you need to understand some aspects. What did the Zhou dynasty do? I'm not going to go into that right now, but I do see a lot of faces who I also see on campus, so feel free to catch me. Sun Tzu talks about winning a war without fighting. Now, Laura Jackson, who is a China expert from the US, she says that three warfares aims at undermining international institutions, changing borders, subverting global media, all without firing a shot. So this doctrine was also approved by the CCP's Central Committee and the Central Military Commission in December 2003. If this was not important, it wouldn't be adopted across so many different bodies in China. Chapter 2, Section 18 of the Chinese People's Liberation Army Political Work Regulations sets forth three warfares among all other political tasks. This three warfares under wartime political work, it's seen as public opinion warfare, psychological warfare, legal warfare. And these are actively taught to PLA officers, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the United Front Work Department. Now, these work regulations have been revised over time, again and again and again. And the latest output from the PLA Academy of Military Science and the PLA National Defense University builds on three warfare's doctrines and expands its roles and methods. And they've come up with a lot of publications in Mandarin language. What does all of this mean for India? As I said, the latest military strategy or doctrine talks about using information. Battle lines clearly have become much more blurred, and battle lines no longer remain restricted to the conventional battlefield. Because of the ease of usage of technology, now even civilians either get used as combatants or as active targets of warfare strategies. Cyber warfare is what I mean. So there was this report by the US-based social media analytics firm called Graphica, and they revealed a pro-Chinese political spam operation promoting a new and distinctive form of video content. It's been there since 2019 on very popular social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. This content is being called spamouflage, and it uses artificial intelligence and generates videos of fictitious persons to create deceptive political content. Frequent content churned out are along the lines of US inaction over gun violence in the US and great power cooperation between US and China and so on. The report terms these operations as state-aligned and political. So this is a very important development, not just because it signals innovation in technology, but also because there are future possibilities of rampant dissemination of disinformation and influence operations in the social media space. What are the ramifications? So what? Social media tells us a lot of things. Why should we care? Okay, why should we care? Because social media is something which connects everyone, almost all of us, at least I do, all of us use it. So there are impressionable audiences who form the civil society, which in democratic societies casts votes in favor or against political candidates in elections, influencing audiences against electoral candidates who may have adversarial worldview against the worldview that China has. Disinformation can be a tool which can create a sort of discontentment, even though it might really be based on fake news or disinformation or misinformation. It can have implications. Elections can be turned, and I'm pretty sure you do know about foreign actors and how they have tried to upturn a lot of elections in a lot of democratic countries. I'll not name them because it will take the discussion far away. Coming back to how could this information warfare from China target India? So the usage of AI-generated content, it started from deepfake apps, which use deep learning algorithms for face swapping. And there have been, a lot of incidents wherein there have been very sensitive regions of India, which have boundary conflicts with China. There have been easily available tools or technology which is made available, to people or citizens of India, which collect voice notes. Earlier, espionage would happen through the placing of real people, spies, espionage. To understand the diverse linguistic makeup of India, the person or the spy would have to learn the language. Learning a language takes a lot of time, at least 10 years, I would say, if it's a foreign language. As opposed to that, now there are apps, which can collect voice samples. It gets easier to train the language, whoever's learning the language, or to make things, much more easily understandable. So In 2022, China released its position paper, and it talked about the ethical governance of AI. And it says that it is the most disruptive technology. It's given rise to a lot of uncertainty, etc. But then, in its own military doctrines, it calls for the active usage of AI and technology and information warfare. In August last year, there was New Kite Data Labs, which again is a US based think tank. It revealed that Beijing based AI and data collection, there are these a lot of firms. One of them is called Speech Ocean. It's collected voice samples from militarily sensitive regions of India, including Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, Arunachal Pradesh, and so on. Speech Ocean apparently worked with a New Delhi based subcontractor who recruited individuals to record their voices in their languages and accents in lieu of small amounts of money. So, the report underlined that Speech Ocean is dangerous, and it sells the data to Chinese military. The data collected from India was sold to, first to the Chinese military, and then it went up through through the chain to a lot of other institutions within the PRC. Um, While Chinese agencies were collecting data sets like voice samples from Indian regions, Beijing introduced new rules in its own country, increasing the government's grip over Chinese tech sector because it understands the ways in which AI can be disruptive, the ways in which it can be used for information warfare. So, as AI technologies advance, it needs to be kept in mind that this is already being considered as an important domain for warfare, and it's there in China's military doctrines, and it gets used for psychological warfare. With that, I'll come to the end of my presentation. I hope I did not exceed the time limit. In case you have questions, please raise your hands. Please introduce yourself and ask me a question.
I'm Shravan Saini from Jindal University. So, can the PLA match the might of, let's say, the American military and the American industrial military powerhouse in the next decade or something? Yes, they have more number of naval ships than the American Navy does, but there is still a huge technological gap between the two.
Okay, thanks for that wonderful question. Very often there are these questions which come around. Would the next would the US still remain the most powerful leader of the international system in the next 10 years, given the fact that China's economy is expanding? It has expanded. It's made a lot of strides in AI and so on. See, when we talk about power differentials and when we are doing a comparative analysis, there are certain aspects of IR which we need to keep in mind. In order to establish hegemony of the entire system, any country first would have to establish regional dominance, regional hegemony, which is why China so many times in its military doctrines talks about local warfares, right? So there is clear, if this region wouldn't have been a challenge, they wouldn't be talking about it in their own doctrines. So they've not yet been able to establish regional hegemony as well within Asia. Once that happens, maybe they can think of expanding their dominance to other parts of the world. Another useful thing to understand or answer this question would be, how many military bases do you think China has in the world vis-a-vis the US? Military bases. Absolutely. For any hegemon, and when I use the word hegemon, I don't use negative connotations. I'm using it more in IR terms. I mean, leader of the state. For any leader of any leader of the international system, maintaining bases is very important. The US, as you said, if we just do, probably the ratio would be 1:100. It doesn't mean China is not creating bases. It is creating bases. It's often said that it could be dual usage because China doesn't really say what it's going to use the Hambantota port for or Gwadar port for and so on. But the fact still remains, numerically, the US is still stronger. China has not been able to establish regional hegemony as well. And will the US give in so easily? That's also an important question. Just moving beyond the fact that India's foreign policy is cautious vis-a-vis the West, vis-a-vis China. Just moving beyond that also, if we just compare US and China, you will see it has a lot more alliances than China has. How many alliances does China really have? How many countries in the world do you think really would come in if China were to ever declare a war against the US? Pakistan? North Korea? These are not strong. Russia also may or may not. So that is another interesting thing. Then you talked about chips, right? See, this is the whole fight over Taiwan for. Of course, China wants to take it back, and there are a lot of other narratives that the CCP churns out to its domestic audience. But the thing is, if you can have the control over those chips, and the industry, nothing like it. The Taiwanese have been able to do it, but China hasn't been able to do it, and the US would not want that to happen, which is why you see so many state visits happening from the American side right now. So, and China's economy at the moment is not doing really well. I'm pretty sure, I'm not going to go into the details because I'm pretty sure you all use social media and you all would have read it. So I won't. 10 years ago, there used to be these huge bets and predictions that China is going to be the next leader. It's taking over the US and so on. I don't think I'm going to make the same bet in 2023. I think you had a follow-up question. Please feel free to ask.
So, my question is about Taiwan, right? Taiwan has a very successful chip industry on which the entire world depends. If Taiwan's chip industry falls, we wouldn't have anything new coming out of the world. Everything would basically fall. So, is there a possibility that China could actually invade Taiwan, as they speak in literally every year? The recent party meeting as well. So, considering, yes, China of course doesn't have the military capability to do so as of right now, because they only have yes, they have the ballistic missiles to destroy Taiwan's military capabilities, but of course Taiwan also has a guerrilla warfare strategy against Chinese forces. So can they really invade Taiwan in the next decade or next 2-3 decades? Also.
This is actually the $1 million question. This started since February 24th last year, when Russia attacked Ukraine, and there were these fears all across the globe, and definitely in Taiwan, that China is going to ape the same thing and launch a full-blown attack. But China didn't, or rather I would say couldn't. If you just compare Russia and China, you'll see huge differences. The differences being, China is heavily dependent on the global economy for its continued rise. Russia is not. Russia's economic growth had already fallen down to close to 1%. But China cannot afford that. The moment it launches an attack on Taiwan, there may or may not be responses from the West. But if there are responses, there's always that if, then it also means economic sanctions in all probability, which have happened against Russia. Then what does China do? So it could not. And given the fact that its economy was beginning to unravel, the effects of which we see in 2023 right now, it could not afford to do that. Does that mean China is never going to do that? Of course, China would want to have, for two reasons. Simple nationalistic reasons, getting back the ROC, it's part of the mainland, etc. And two, the chips, which I think you asked about in the previous question. The Taiwanese themselves are not very sure, though, if the Americans would come and help. If you see all the surveys which have been done amongst the Taiwanese youth, they are really not sure. Most of them say US or the West will not put its boots on the ground the way they did not even in Ukraine. So what do they do? When last year Russia invaded Ukraine, President Tsai Ing-wen was very, very worried, as any leader should be. So she said compulsory military service for the able-bodied above 18. So people had to go in for military service, and they're still in military service. So it's not like the Taiwanese are not preparing. They've prepared. And then even from Tsai Ing-wen also went to the US this year itself. There are a lot of military exercises which happen, and that is to create a psychological warfare against the Taiwanese forces per se. Would China really be able to attack? Okay, sure, they have ballistic missiles, but Taiwan is an island. How long can the navy hold in? Also, if you see China's own military discourses, just the way India has a fear of a two-front war, China also has a fear of a two-front war. One against India, one against Taiwan. If both collaborate, nothing like it. Um, the Indian Navy and the Taiwanese Navy, if you just track in the last 1 month, there have been a lot of meetings going on, some in the public domain, some behind closed doors. Why is this happening? Why the Navy? That might just be the weak point of China. So it will attack at some point. It will attack. It's not a question of would it attack or would it not attack. It will attack, but Taiwan would is all actively preparing its defenses. Even in the West, there have been these churnings. There have been a lot of talks. So let's hope it never happens. So yeah, I'll come back to you in a bit because there's someone else who wants to ask a question. Mehak, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. As always, it's wonderful to attend your lectures. So my question was, there were recent satellite images that showed that China had built a pier in the Ream naval base in Cambodia, which looked a lot like the one it had built in Djibouti. So is China preparing another naval base in Cambodia, and what threat does that pose to India, considering that it's so close to our country? And so what is your opinion on that?
Okay. So yeah, satellite imagery is a great boon. I've read of this news item, but for some odd reasons, I couldn't track the satellite imagery. See, Cambodia is one of the countries in the world which is heavily influenced by China in all domains, across all domains. It's the ASEAN country which has the highest number of BRI projects in Cambodia. It is the ASEAN country which is believed to probably fall prey to China's debt trap diplomacy before any other country can do. It is the country wherein Cambodians themselves have been protesting the fact that Chinese businesses have wiped out the Cambodian language, because you do not see signs anymore in Cambodian, the local language. You see it in Chinese. So it's heavily indebted to China, and China, through its deep pockets and its very, very shrewd or smart diplomacy, has been able to influence Cambodia. I would not be surprised if there is a base, and China never gives that clarity whether a base is whether if it's a base. Is it just an outpost? Is it just some sort of a bilateral exercise? There are lots of reports of China building bases even in Tajikistan, and these are I read these news reports from I think at least 2 to 3 years ago. But still, there is no clarity. Tajikistan says that no, it's a regular outpost. What does a regular outpost mean? What does a foreign country have to do? How does it set up regular outpost? But these are questions which countries which would be heavily influenced by China, they would deflect. They would not really answer. Cambodia is one of the countries, and there is within ASEAN there is a great there's a great divergence on how to deal with China, because most of these countries have the South China Sea dispute, but and then there is Cambodia, which or even Laos for that matter, which is heavily influenced by China across the economic realm, the military realm, the political realm, all sorts of realms. What does that mean for India? Well, definitely doesn't really mean well, because we are in an active conflict with the PRC, with the CCP. An increase in their military prowess doesn't mean well for us. How do we counter it? I think we'll have to wait and watch and see what our diplomacy does. But I think this is a development we need to watch out for. Yes, please.
Ma'am, I had two questions. First of all, considering China's pace of development and their commitment to the same, will we enter a short period of bipolar world order before we enter a multipolar world order? And second question is, in one of the readings that you shared with us for the workshop, there was a mention of the weakness of US's grid system or electric infrastructure. Is this weakness still there, and how seriously are they taking getting out of that spot of weakness?
Okay, again, very interesting questions. So, the world order has moved from unipolar to bipolar, unipolar to multipolar to bipolar, to the end of bipolarity to multipolar. China now calls for true multilateralism, despite the fact that it wants to be the single pole of international relations. Are we going to become bipolar again? I don't think so. We just had the Vasudeva Kutumbakam themed G20, in which and I think in the first half we heard a lot about it, and as to how India is trying to project an alternative worldview, which is not the Western way in which the West has traditionally gone around oppressing a lot of countries, establishing them as colonies. Neither is it like the Chinese way, which sees itself as the Middle Kingdom and so on. There is going to be a challenge. It's not just from India, but there are other players also who are trying to voice their ways of life. This why did the whole term global south come into existence? I don't think we are going to get back to bipolarity, because the moment any sort of G2 or bipolarity tries to get established, there will be other players which do command some sort of respect and economic prowess in the international system, which will, of course, not let that bipolarity go back to just the way it was in the Cold War era. Weaknesses of US infrastructure, see, China, given the fact that it's not a democracy, can do a lot of things to understand how infrastructure can be used in different ways. Here I refer to, say, the digital infrastructure. I know most of you, or at least we are all the Netflix generation. And there was this very horrible or very scary OTT series, which was completely dystopian. I'm forgetting the name though, and in which they talk about a social credit system, wherein, say, for example, if you miss a turn on the road, your points reduce. If you write something against the ruling government on any social media, your points get reduced. Or if you say, even if genuine, even if you swear at someone on the roads, your points get reduced. And then when you go to, say, you buy a railway ticket or a plane ticket, oh, your social credits are not enough. You're not eligible, right? That social credit system is there in China. How have they been able to do that? Till very, I think, not too far ago, China was the world's most populated country before we took over. But how have they been able to do this to such a humongous population? They have something called the hukou system, or just one identity card. It's a great method, a great mechanism, wherein, say, for example, say I'm from Assam and I work in Delhi, I commit a crime and I get out, I run away, there is no trace. But if I am in China, there are those facial recognition systems. They track it straight to my hukou or my household registration number, and I'm very easily tracked. That's been done. That's been this whole level playing 1.2, 1.3 billion people have been used. That sort of architecture, digital architecture, I don't think any part of the world has. Well, it's a separate thing. Citizens won't even allow it to happen. But imagine the potency of this tool. It's been tried and tested domestically on 1.3 billion people. And it exists in place. And I don't speak just by reading books. I've lived there for a while. It's scary. I was going to use the word beautiful, but I think it would be scary. So that digital architecture, we don't have. I don't think the US has it, and the US will not be able to do it. Because of a lot of constraints that, the democratic governance system places on us. But the fact is we need to watch out for it, because it can be used as a malicious tool.
Ma'am,
just let me take one question from someone who's not
I just
asked.
have a follow-up question to this only.
Okay, let me take it from her first, because she's been raising her hand for a while.
Okay.
I'll take both of your questions together.
Thank you so much. My name is Swati, and I'm a pol science student at DU. So we can see both India and China are, we are building our capabilities, and it's more of a competitive relationship rather than a friendly relationship. So I just wanted to know, do you think technical superiority is the only deterrent against China, or can we leverage our traditional, military strategies also?
Okay, thank you, Swati. Uh, I'll just take your question and your question. I'll need to wrap up this session. I'm meeting into other sessions. So please, I'll stop at these two questions and.
Ma'am, the infrastructure in US that I was referring to was related to the statement there said something about a 6-month shutdown will give China the opportunity to invade Taiwan. How does I was relating to that one, which does not make sense to me with respect to what you just explained.
Okay,
Although it was
that
helpful.
actually doesn't make sense to me. Also, maybe if I read the context,
Okay.
it'll become clear.
Perhaps I'll mail it to you
Sure,
later.
sure.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Ariman. I am a first year master student in OP Jindal Global University. So my question is based on the Chinese diaspora, and so a few days back, I had a few weeks back, in fact, I had read an article on the satirical channel called The Foxy, who was saying that. There were second generation US citizens who were actually Chinese winning a competition, a quiz competition. So my question is that uh, where does the allegiance of this diaspora lie? Is it towards the home country or is it towards the harboring country, if you can say that?
Okay, interesting question. Fine. Let me answer Swati's question first. Largely till Galwan, we used to say India-China relationship is a mix of competition and cooperation. But China's unilateral aggression at the borders just swept that cooperation a bit far away. So it's clearly conflict. And it's not like that we didn't yet, even after that, we didn't try to extend a hand of friendship. We still tried. We sent a delegation to the Beijing Olympics. Even when the whole world was boycotting the Beijing Olympics, how did China repay us? China repaid India by using Chief Apao as the mascot. Who is Chief Apao? He was the person who was leading the Western Theatre Command and killing our soldiers. That's how we got repaid. So it's very clear that it's not cooperation; it's conflict. Is it just technological superiority which we must build? And if we don't have it, what do we really do? It cannot just be technological superiority. It has to be superiority across all domains. Now, how do we build that? In theory, there's something called internal balancing, in which you build your own capacities across all domains, be it economy, be it military, be it technology. Now, given the fact that we don't have it yet, what are we doing? We are pooling our resources. If you see, even in the Quad, there are a lot of these critical segments which we have identified, and we are talking about it. Even when Prime Minister Modi went to the US recently, one of the agreements which was signed was regarding rare earth metals. Rare earth metals are in things from everything, including this mic to nuclear reactors to my glasses to the cameras and everything. Right? China sits on 97% of the production of the total rare earth metals. It's not like these rare earth metals are not there in other parts of the world. They're there in the US, they're there in India as well. But we don't extract them because the process is extremely difficult. What do we do? So we've signed an agreement and we're trying to, whatever we don't have, let's cooperate with like minded countries and cooperate to the extent that our national interests get served. So that's what we are trying. So wherever, individually, we cannot really ensure that we are more powerful than the adversary. And I use the word adversary because China has left no stone unturned to make it clear that we are an adversary. We cooperate with like-minded countries. Coming to your question about the diaspora, I'll give you one anecdote. It's very difficult to understand whose allegiance lies where. But if, say, someone, if anyone has a family member back home, then the Chinese state very well, because as I said, they have the hukou, can very well regulate your activities even if you're abroad, because your folks still might be back home and they can be used as a tool. But since you mentioned diaspora, I'll just give this anecdote and end it here, just to let you know how difficult it is to understand whose allegiance lies where. So it has to be done on a case-to-case basis. Years ago, I was working in a think tank in Kolkata, where the very small, minuscule minority Chinese diaspora lives. And they're third generation, fourth generation people, largely people who escaped from China during the Cultural Revolution. So I went there with a think tank. And I was also asked to help them to understand, because my mother tongue happens to be Bengali and I speak Chinese as well. So what I found there was really interesting, and there was this person, Hu Shijin, who was the editor of Global Times once upon a time. He's still a big wolf warrior. Well, he's not a diplomat, but a wolf warrior journalist, and he makes very vitriolic comments on online. But then he wasn't this vitriolic when he came back in, this was 2013. So they said, they expressed the wish that they want to go to Chinatown, which is in this place called Tangra in Kolkata. So we went there and they met the Chinese diaspora, or so they met, and the people, the local Chinese, well, I would call them, how should I say, the residents of Tangra. The residents of Tangra just didn't understand Chinese. So they kept looking at my face. So I had to translate whatever Hu Shijin was saying in Chinese. And they replied, the residents of Tangra replied in Bengali or in English or in Hindi. And their Bengali was better than mine, trust me. So Hu Shijin asks them that, you don't speak Chinese. Don't you miss the motherland? One of them said in Bengali, this is the motherland. We adopted to India and Indianness, and this is home. So what motherland? And he said that in fluent Bengali, better than mine. What do I make of this? Was it just a facade? Maybe after I left there was something else? I don't know. Should I trust it at face value? Because it was really heartening to see that they said that this is the motherland and this is my mother tongue. It's not even like I can't speak my mother tongue well enough, but he did. What do I make of it? Case by case basis. So when the case comes to light, then there are actions taken. I think you probably might have read the news that about a certain spies in UK's parliament, which have come to the. So I think case by case basis would be the best thing to do. Okay, I know I've eaten into the next session, so I'm really sorry, Dr. Pandya, Dr. Jain. Thank you so much for having me here. Over to you.